Speculation continues to swirl around whether the White Sox will someday trade one of their talented young catchers, especially after the general manager suggested it's a possibility down the road, and teams are starting to inquire about Edgar Quero.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Todd Welter. Welcome to Locked On White Sox, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. Well, I'm going to get the fan poll Friday going over which rookie you think will provide the most long-term value and whether it's a good idea to keep Grant Taylor in the bullpen. After I discuss why it's not the end of the world the White Sox are pursuing Ryan O'Hearn in free agency. But first, let's discuss general manager Chris Getz leaving the door open on the team trading one of their young catchers down the road, and also recent rumors circulating around whether Edgar Quero is on the trade market and how that could be a huge mistake. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. So I really hope general manager Chris Getz is picking repurpose over reallocating when it comes to Edgar Quero and Kyle Teel. Although maybe when it came to, one of the catchers that he's going to reallocate, maybe he was talking about Korey Lee. I just don't think you trade away two talented bats like you have with Edgar Quero and Kyle Teel, especially since they can still possibly grow into being great catchers. And as Chris Getz has said, catching is gold, and it's also a physically taxing position. So there is nothing wrong with having guys split time catching and DHing. And then with Teal's athletic ability and already playing some outfield in college, he could possibly provide some positional versatility down the road. And if the organization can't find a first base option long-term, I don't get why they still will not entertain maybe getting Quero and Teel at bats while trying out first base. Because the beauty of catchers is it can always become left fielders and first basemen too. And I was really hoping this idea of the White Sox possibly trading one of these two young catchers that they have would die, would at least die down this offseason. But then Chris Getz left the possibility open that he could potentially deal one of them. Probably not this offseason, but he did say it's a possibility. And there are reports out there that teams are calling about Edgar Quero. And to me, that would be a huge mistake, especially this offseason, and possibly for as long as the team has club control over these two talented catchers. And let's stop getting ahead of our skis here, as I know the White Sox still need to make more infusion of talent. So I get why people are saying, well, why don't you trade one of your two talented young catching catchers? Or why not even trade Korey Lee? But at some point, you got to stop flipping young, controllable players as your solution for infusing more talent. Instead, build with them, and start using next season when wins and losses still won't matter much to experiment with seeing if they can provide some additional positional versatility while they hopefully can get better at the plate and still get better as catchers. Because Kyle Teel has a chance to be a star in this league. He also has a chance to be the team's best overall bat. Because he can also, he's got better bat to ball skills, I think, than Colson Montgomery, and he can hit for power. I said overall. I think Colson's going to be the overall, and I'll get to it in the third segment, better power hitter. And Edgar Quero also has the potential to be a very good hitter in this league. He's already shown he's got good bat to ball skills. He just has to provide the power. And obviously they got work to do defensively behind the plate, but bench coach Walker McKinven turned Wilson Contreras into a solid receiver in Milwaukee. And by all indications, that's what Chris Getz said, that's one of the things that McKinven's going to work on next season, and obviously in spring training, is getting these guys' defense up to snuff. And if he can do it for Contreras, I think he can do the same for these two. And yet, we still have to deal with the possibility that, hey, maybe, that dark cloud of one of them possibly being traded. Because this is what Chris Getz had to say about the possibility of trading one of his two young catchers. Maybe he was also including Korey Lee in this. This is from James Fegan, the White Sox Machine.com beat reporter at JR Fegan. Tweeted this out, and I got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. Ask Chris Getz about the White Sox potentially trading from their surplus of young catchers. Quote, There could be a time for reallocation or repurpose to make the roster a little bit more functional. Is that time now? I don't think so. I don't, but down the road, you never know. Now, it could also be, again, anything's possible. And if you're a GM, I will say this, it would be organizational negligence to just completely rule out trading them. I mean, if you get a Godfather offer, make the deal. But I hope it's more repurpose than reallocate, that type of stuff. But then baseball writer Francis Romero, he tweeted this out, the Latin baseball writer here, at Francis Romero FR. He tweeted this out. Multiple MLB teams are interested in acquiring 22-year-old Cuban catcher Edgar Quero. The price the White Sox would demand will be high. And finally, even though, again, you can only take his information with a grain of salt because he just keeps showing how out of touch he is with the modern game, but he is still a former baseball GM. He has a forum. The Athletics' Jim Bowden recently wrote this. I find the catching market interesting as the Nationals have joined the Rays, Padres, Astros, Brewers, and Rangers in making calls to improve their depth at the position. The teams getting the most calls and texts about catchers are the Orioles on Adley Rutschman, the Royals on prospect Blake Mitchell, the White Sox on Edgar Quero, and the Mariners on prospect Harry Ford. Now, the only way I'm going to say it's okay to trade Quero or even Teel is first, if both have obviously made the necessary growth defensively and offensively, where they have to be that young piece that gets you that superstar player back that puts you over the top. It is that deal where to get something great, you might have to give up something good, or to give up something great, you might have to give up something great back, or greater to great, that type of stuff. And they have to make growth defensively and offensively, especially both have to hit for more power. And that would be one thing. Or again, if you are in the arguing multiplying an asset for more quality assets, you want to take one into say 2 or 3, then I want 2 or 3 top prospects back, top 100 prospects back, because that is what those guys were. And they're still very talented young players. So you're basically giving up top 100 talent for what? It better be to multiply that. But otherwise, figure out a way to make sure both of those bats are in the lineup 5 days a week. And let's build with these two in the lineup. Yes, they play the same position, but as you saw, if you have one DH and one catching, you can get their bats in the lineup pretty much every day. And I feel like us White Sox fans have become so conditioned to players that we can't help ourselves to think, well, one of them has to be traded to get more talent. There is this thing called a draft, an international free agency, and then developing that talent where you can get that more talent. It does work. And you could say, well, it doesn't work for the White Sox. They have drafted some talent. But again, they keep trading it away because it's not the overall, but maybe things are changing. Mike Shirley seems to be getting it as the amateur scouting director, and they've revamped the international free agency. It's time to stop always trading this young talent. Maybe try to build with it. I mean, we had the idea of Grant Taylor being traded at the deadline. And while the idea of taking one asset and multiplying it into many pieces is intriguing, Taylor also has the core talent in the bullpen to have the bullpen built around him. Start looking at some of these guys you can just build around. Why not build a competitive batting order around Colson Montgomery, Teel, and Quero with Chase Mydroth, Miguel Vargas, and possibly Lenyn Sosa as a supporting cast players, along with Brooks Baldwin in that super utility role. And I say Sosa possibly because he does have that narrow path to follow to be a long-term value player, whereas the others can provide, value via the glove and at the plate to be at least always a raised floor talent level player. I mean, if Sosa stops hitting for average or power, one of the others, there's not much value he provides because he's terrible defensively. Now, if Getz wants to flip Korey Lee for some organizational depth like he did with Matt Thaiss, I'm fine, although you better find a way to convince them Will Venable to have Quero and Teel in the lineup together at least 5 days a week, because Lee's presence in the clubhouse served as Venable's security blanket to have both in the lineup. And again, I just suggest 5 days because you want to give a catcher at least a full day of rest to rest those knees. So that's why it's just getting kind of irritating. Well, 670 The Score's Bruce Levine reported that the White Sox have reached out to Ryan O'Hearn's camp, and let's discuss why it's fine that the White Sox are pursuing the free agent, and that's coming up after the break. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. And it keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And I'm always telling you about how fun it is to play FanDuel's traditional money lines, the over-unders, and the spreads. But if you want to win some big-time money or at least double or triple your cash, play FanDuel's props, parlays, or futures. I think Chicago can ride the start all the way to the Central Division title. I know they're starting to cool off, but maybe, hey, you think they're going to still pull it off? You know, they can surprise and shock the world. Well, that is currently at plus 1,900 the last time I checked. So even putting as little as $5 on that, and if it somehow happens, that could pay out $95. And again, maybe you're more realistic and you want to build a parlay of Chicago making the play-in game and having, over 40 wins this season, like they normally do. Well, that's at plus 231, so there's a chance to at least double your money. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe it wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. Also, make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com and on TapSportsNet.com. So obviously, I want the White Sox to sign Josh Naylor. I know I've been just going, kind of been banging the drum for that. I mean, I've also seen folks out in White Sox social media world, the fans wanting to say, hey, why don't we get Cody Bellinger? Because he can do outfield and first base. I just think Cody Bellinger is going to cost a lot more money. And I'm just tired of seeing Josh Naylor absolutely destroy White Sox pitching. I know it's not the best, but also Josh Naylor's 28. I would prefer that and a left-handed bat. But I also want to be 7 feet tall, and that's never going to happen. So being short and the White Sox not signing Naylor are just two things I'm going to have to accept in life. I've already accepted being short, honestly, because, after a while, you kind of give up on your dreams of making the NBA. Well, the White Sox are at least shopping in the bargain bin section, though, for a left-handed bat, and I'm at least encouraged by that. Remember, it's baby steps, because last year they were shopping in the salvage heap. Now they're at least potentially looking for a bargain bin free agent to cover first. Although I'm seeing some reactions like, no thank you to Ryan O'Hearn, or a preference to just run it back with Miguel Vargas and Lenyn Sosa at first. And me, if it's a short-term deal, I'm fine with bringing in O'Hearn as he raises the team's talent floor. And if he can produce another 3 F4 season, he raises the team's talent floor even more. And while he might not ideally fit into the White Sox preference of, hitters that make good swing decisions at the plate, let's not forget hitting director Ryan Fuller somehow got through to Luis Robert Jr., or at least the philosophy to not swing so wildly. So maybe a second run of Fuller working with O'Hearn may work. Because 670 The Score's Bruce Levine reported on the station yesterday that he talked to sources and discovered that the White Sox have had conversation with Ryan O'Hearn's camp, although he kept referring to him as a power hitter. And there needs to be some clarification in that. And I've seen that a few times, people referring to him as a power hitter. He is a power hitter in the sense that over the past 3 seasons, he can provide a slug over 400. That's a good number to have. That 400 to 450 range, even over. Yeah, he can provide power, especially after he left Kansas City where he underachieved. He posted slugs of 480 in 2023 with Baltimore while working with Fuller, 427 in 2024, and 437 overall between Baltimore and San Diego this past season. However, the most home runs he has hit during that stretch was 17, and that came this past season. So not exactly a true slugger in the form. More of, I would say, a professional hitter like Mike Tauchman. He's just a little bit younger, so there's, the legs probably aren't going to go out as much and that. But the other thing is, you put him in a more spacious ballpark like Kauffman Stadium, even though they did move the fences in at one point, or Petco, the slug doesn't show up, as he had a 387 slug with San Diego after getting traded there. That was his number during his time with the Padres. And the swing decisions, I know the Seager rating isn't the best. The Seager being, a guy developed rating based on how he thinks Corey Seager has one of the best swing decisions, all that stuff, all the numbers that go into it. But he did go from a 4.1% walk rate in 2023, his first in Baltimore, to 9.3 in 2024 to 10.7. So he did obviously learn something from Ryan Fuller's instruction. And this past season, he had a 281 overall average and a 330 BABIP. So when he did put the ball in play, he did find a relative decent, common ground of getting the ball in play and getting some hits. So that's why I'm not totally against the White Sox going after O'Hearn. Now, one thing that was brought to my attention from my buddy Bez, colleague of mine at OnTapSportsNet.com, friend of the show, obviously he doesn't have a ton of run in the outfield. And I know I've said, hey, he can kind of maybe be a right fielder. I mean, he can be in a rotation, but yeah, he doesn't have a ton of run playing in the outfield. So if he's going to be used to be, kind of more of that bridge right fielder until Brandon Montgomery is ready, you don't have a ton of experience with him there, but he could be used in a versatile role. You could rotate him and Mike Tauchman out there if possible on days you want to give Lenyn Sosa some at-bats at DH on the days that you're not giving Edgar Quero and Kyle Teel at-bats at DH. Although I do think Bez from OnTap Sportsnet made a fair point on X for me Twitter. Would you rather take your chances on Lenyn Sosa, who's younger, learning first, because he does keep showing this knack of improving? I mean, we all kept thinking, there's no way he's going to be a viable player in the major leagues after you saw the first, cups of coffee he had. And he's become a viable hitter. Now, it's a very narrow path that he has to be in terms of a value hitter. It's old school in terms of, average, and not at the greatest average, but a solid average. And also then hitting for power. If one of those two things stops, or if both stops, then yeah, he doesn't provide a lot of value because his defense is terrible and he doesn't walk much. He is kind of the anti-philosophy of what Ryan Fuller wants out of the hitters. But at the same point, who's to say he can't get better? Because he keeps showing us he can get better. But I think you could have both, as you could rotate O'Hearn and Wright first and DH, and have Sosa basically rotate at second, first, and DH, especially on the days that Quero and Teel are not going to be DHing. And for those that are going to throw, well, what about Andrew Benintendi? Hopefully, because it sounds like Chris Getz. I mean, he mentioned that there's some leg issues, that they're not totally abandoning him, obviously, but he did mention corner. And I think he was thinking both left and right field. And I'm really hoping Chris Getz will have pulled off a miracle trade. However, I'm not sure that's going to happen, but the GM did say that Benintendi's been dealing with some Achilles issues. So to me at this point, I would just accept Benintendi's nothing more than maybe a 100 to 115 game player if his legs are starting to go. And to me, then fine, just play him at left 4 days a week and use him as a pinch hitter off the bench. But you just can't have him DHing too much because, you got to stop saying, well, we got to get Benintendi in the lineup. It's sunk cost. That 17.1, I know Getz hates it, and so does Reinsdorf, but that 17.1 million is sunk. You're never going to get any value out of that contract of what you thought. So focus more on using that DH spot as a rotation for Sosa, Quero, Teel, and possibly O'Hearn. Because you can also have O'Hearn hit against lefties, and maybe he's in the DH spot on days that there's a lefty and you maybe still want to protect Teel against lefties. And while I would love for the White Sox to be in the Kyle Tucker sweepstakes and also to sign Josh Naylor, it's not going to happen. So we have to accept that at least they're shopping in the bargain bin section. And that's sadly an improvement, but at least it's somewhat moving. That's how sad the state of the White Sox have been having. Well, I want to keep finding ways for you everydayers to have your voice heard, and that's why I do Fan Poll Fridays. And I got 2 to review with you that shows you guys think very highly of Colson Montgomery, and that is coming up after the break. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or to get their podcast, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. So I ran 2 fan polls on the YouTube community page, and I agree with both of the winners of the polls. And I ask you, the everydayer, about who among the rookies had the most long-term value. You guys overwhelmingly selected Colson Montgomery. And then I asked what you thought about Grant Taylor staying in the bullpen, and you mostly agreed that that's fine with him being in the bullpen. So I asked, just reviewing, giving you the results. I've got the visual up on YouTube for those watching. Which White Sox rookie do you believe will provide the most long-term value on the South side? 63% of you said Colson Montgomery, 26% voted Teel, 6% voted Quero, 3% voted Taylor. Although with Taylor, I do think that's a little bit low. Just, to remind you on this stuff is, I think we got to remember, what if down the road they do move him to starter and he turns out to be a dominant ace? You'll have gotten some value out of him out of the bullpen, and then you've got a great, pitcher. Or again, how about he does become Mason Miller-like and the team is competitive and making the playoffs? You will need him to get big outs in the playoffs. So there's some potential long-term value for him. But obviously, I agree, Colson, he's got the MVP potential. He can hit 30 to 45 home runs. I mean, he's got the chance to be an icon. I agree. He's got the icon status potential. He could be the sky's the limit for Colson Montgomery. So I think that, he could be that long-term value player. He could be the face of the franchise. And also when Billy Carlson, hopefully he makes that swing adjustment, this year's first round pick, he's eventually going to move Colson to third base because, again, Carlson's got the better glove. If that happens, then you've got obviously value at shortstop, and then you can move him to the corner outfield, and you're going to get immense power at a position that's not getting a lot of power around the league. So fully agree with you guys on that one. But the other biggest thing, though, is for all 4 to even reach that long-term value, next season has to be about continued ascension, continued improvement. They have to avoid stagnation and regression. Well, in terms of Taylor in the bullpen, I asked, should the White Sox keep Grant Taylor in the bullpen? 71% of you agree with Chris Getz's decision to keep Taylor in the bullpen and in a multi-inning. 29% of you said no, make him a starter. And I saw something floating around on a site I used to contribute for and used to run, but, I've moved on. But I did see something about, well, it feels like they're following the Chris Sale and Garrett Crochet plan, but that's also wasting years of club control. They're going to waste, they wasted all that club control on Crochet and Chris Sale. And that's somehow a crime to, if you got to wait that, or if you eventually make him a starter after 3 years. Okay, first, we don't know what club control is going to look like in the next CBA. Because if the owners really, really want their salary cap, you best believe the players are going to be like, well, I'm not going to commit to 6 years of club control, 3 of which you can just set my salary whatever you want. I mean, the owners are eventually going to have to then compromise and probably do what the NHL does. So don't expect, and that's the other thing. All the other leagues have fought to get those salary caps, whether they're soft or hard, but they've also had to give up, many years of club control. Second, he's not eligible for free agency until 2032. I think everybody's forgetting he was called up well after the clock. The clock hasn't started on his club control. So why is that even a point? They got a free look at him. That's what happens when you call somebody up after April. You get basically a free look at him. So that's why they called up Chase Mydroth after the 3-week period or whatever, when it didn't count. It's 173 days. So they will get an extra year. He's not a free agent until 2032. And this, sort of floating this, like how they just, I can't believe they dropped the ball on Garrett Crochet. Garrett Crochet was drafted in 2020 during a pandemic. And in 2021, they didn't have a spot for him in the rotation. They needed a veteran starter who had been there before to start. like Lance Lynn. They didn't need Garrett Crochet. They wanted him in the bullpen. That was how deep they were. And if they were going to make anybody a starter out of a reliever, it would have been Michael Kopech, not Garrett Crochet. And then Crochet got hurt in 22, and he was out for most of 23. There was no organizational malpractice, and it was the same thing with Chris Sale. They had I remember they had a rotation. They had guys, and they were worried about his delivery. So that's what it was. And here's the other thing you got to forget. If he's a free agent by 2032, you know who will hopefully be owning the team by then? Justin Ishbia in his deep top pocket. So maybe they'll have signed him. Maybe he does go in the rotation at 28 or 29, and he becomes that dominant starter. And maybe Justin Ishbia goes, you know what? I have a lot of money. I'll spend it. I'll be the rich hobbyist. And the other thing that gets my goat with these Taylor, I like to call them the Taylor starter truthers. They're out there. They want to use this slant of the organization should develop guys to their ceiling right away. And I agree. But they're ignoring there's different ways to get there, though. And that's okay. Not everything is linear. That's the thing I think that happens in the prospect coverage. We all want it to be linear. We all want it to be, hey, he goes here, he does this, this, and this. Again, Colson Montgomery, everybody was freaking out about, and yeah, the optics were terrible, but everybody was freaking out when he got the Arizona reset, as I like to call it. And Chris Getz even came out and said, Arizona does this all the time. And they've developed players. And guess who's now on the front office? Assistant GM Josh Barfield, who was in charge of player development. Development isn't linear. And we're also forgetting Tanner McDougal has the potential to fill the void with the same kind of filthy stuff in the rotation. So it's not like it's such a travesty or such organizational negligence for the organization to say, look, this guy has already had Tommy John surgery during college. And then he was, took a little bit of time for obviously to start it, then he had a lat injury in 2024 where he basically missed all this, almost the entire season. And then he starts to show dip velocity and arm fatigue very early into them trying to see if he could be a starter. To me, that's a huge red flag to see if his arm can hold up over a starter's workload. Why mess with that when you could say, okay, why don't we deploy it a certain amount of times when we need the biggest outs? And that's all they're doing. And you know what? Other organizations do it too, and they're fine. Josh Hader has gone on to a fine career. He has been one of the most dominant closers for a while. He's been up, and playoff teams need those guys. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. Well, there's wrong ways, but in this case, it's not linear. It's okay. You're not wasting any club control. You're basically getting another, this will be his actual first year where you're going to burn a club control year. And that's okay. Because again, he's not going to be eligible for free agency until 2032. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast. And I'll be back on Monday with the final Minor League Monday report of the season. I'm going to go over how the White Sox prospects did in the final week of the Arizona Fall League action. You can leave comments about today's episode on the YouTube page via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or on X, formerly Twitter, @LockedOnSox or @ToddJDub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel @Locked On White Sox or wherever you get your audio-only podcasts. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. And I will talk to you Monday.